Okay, so thank you for joining us tonight. So just a quick introduction. My name is Tonya Scher and my pronouns are she, her. I'm the director of schools at Seed St. Louis. I'm going to just kind of summarize what we're going to talk about tonight, not necessarily in this order. A lot of these things are kind of intertwined throughout the presentation, so I might kind of jump around. But the kind of overarching goal of this is to help give you ideas to build capacity for your garden, engage more people, whether that's from the community, from the school community, staff, families, even students. And then I'm going to talk also about some different strategies for maintaining your garden. So some different approaches you can take, and we'll also tie that into summer. I won't be able to really regulate the chat or the Q&A during the presentation, but if you please drop any questions or comments in the chat or Q&A, we will take some time at the end of this to answer any questions. So I'm going to start tonight talking about strategies for community engagement. So if you've worked with us recently to start a new garden project, you may be familiar with the term asset-based community development, or you may have heard of it in other areas. So it's been around since the 80s. The current home of asset-based community development is DePaul University. So you can definitely read and learn a lot more about it on DePaul's website. But essentially, it's just a strategy for community engagement and for basically looking at what your community has, what's right with your community, what assets already exist in your community that can support a project instead of what's wrong with your community or what it's lacking, what it needs. So this is actually a great thing to learn about if you don't already know about it and you're wanting to start a community project, whether that's a garden or any kind of community-based project. It's actually something that I have really I've done activities with students on, so it's a great thing that you can even incorporate into your lessons if you're working with especially middle school or high school students, helping them to kind of identify assets in their community. So this is kind of an example of a worksheet that we use with new garden projects, and I've also used this with middle school and high school students before. So if you ask students or just yourself, if you're thinking about a community focused project that you want to start, in this case, I'm going to use a garden as an example, or maybe you already have a garden. Then to use asset-based community development, you're basically starting by thinking at the individual level. So what individuals in your community exist that may be an asset to your project? So we start brainstorming different individuals. So it could be neighbors, it could be staff, at your school, it could be parents, it could be any individuals that or within the school community or even the greater community, the neighborhood that have resources or skills that could benefit your project. So some examples of this could be maybe a neighbor who has carpentry skills. So we're not just thinking about people that have green thumbs. A garden project involves lots of different skills. So maybe someone who, can fix things, because that will definitely be handy down the road if you have a school or community garden. Even someone that's creative or that is artistic, that could be really useful to a garden project because you may want to paint a mural or make stepping stones for the garden. So maybe there's a parent who has some artistic skills that could be a resource here. So after we brainstorm individuals, we then kind of branch out and think about larger groups, so associations. Maybe it's a religious group, social groups, cultural groups. This could be like Boys and Girl Scouts. So they could be an asset. They're always trying to do projects to earn badges. So that could be how they can maybe support your project. Maybe you could collaborate with them, and in return, they're earning their badge in return for helping you maybe build a bed or plant pollinators or build a bug hotel. So religious groups too, could be an asset. They often want to volunteer and help out. So that could be a resource. So then we even think larger scale. So institutions, schools, hospitals, businesses. Is there like a local nursery in your community that could be an asset to your project? Maybe a group like Home Depot, sometimes they like to donate things, or a hardware store. So we're thinking about skills and resources. So it could be skills, like I mentioned, carpentry skills or, gardening skills, but it could also be things, maybe they have manpower to donate to your project, and you need help with volunteers, or maybe they can help with funding or help with donating supplies. So this is one great way to start thinking about what your community already has that can help leverage your project. And again, this could be a really great activity to do with students too, to get them thinking about all of the assets in their community. Again, if you're just joining us, feel free to drop if you have any questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll take some time at the end to talk about those, or for me to answer those. So staying on the topic with asset-based community development, another thing we have new projects do if they're joining our network is fill out this asset map. So thinking about the assets we just talked about, the individuals, groups, institutions in your community that could benefit your garden project. We ask that people form partnerships with at least 6 of those. So reaching out to these people or these groups and asking them to be a partner on your project. We know all projects are stronger when there's collaborations and partnerships. So we want to emphasize the word partnership because you're not just necessarily utilizing this person or group for what they can give, but how will your project benefit them? Maybe it's benefiting them, maybe in return for their help, you're donating some produce to them. But there are lots of other ways. Sometimes people, like I mentioned, Girl and Boy Scouts, sometimes, maybe you're helping them to fulfill a goal that they have, or maybe they just want to help out. They just want to volunteer, get some volunteer hours. So there are lots of different ways it could benefit them as well, but we like to think of it as a partnership, so it's mutually beneficial. So this could be really helpful if you haven't already done this or you're hoping to start expanding partnerships for your garden. Other good ways to engage the community, or maybe to even if you've identified some of those groups or people, you could also do this, when you want to introduce yourself and start to form that partnership. Do things like bringing flyers around to these groups or individuals in your community. So I did garden classes at a school, and the school was in the Hill neighborhood, and there was a deli nearby, and I had talked to them because the school was really needing help with summer maintenance. They wanted to keep the garden going over summer, but not just summer, but they really use some extra hands with maintenance all around. So I made sure it was okay, with administration, if others were involved in the garden, neighbors, that kind of thing. And we created some flyers kind of highlighting the school garden, and went to like a local deli to see if they were interested. And there were people that were there that were willing to come and help and water the garden some days. And we even offered them to use some space in the garden if they wanted to grow some stuff or to harvest some things. So just like making flyers, even if students can make art, or if your students are saving seeds, you could package up seeds. If you have extra produce, it's always nice if you have something to give out, but just to kind of highlight the garden. And maybe you don't want to involve, the outside community in your garden. That's okay too. These are things you can also do with parents, with the school community as well, staff, to get them excited about the garden. Another thing you could do is have students kind of run a little farmers market. So whenever you're having school events, maybe open house, parent teacher conference, other events that are bringing lots of people to the school, they could have, or even just during like school pickup, you could have a little farmer market or food stand to engage more people in the garden. A common theme you'll see throughout this whole presentation is trying to make the garden an integral part of the school culture. So the more that people are aware of it, the more people are excited about it, the more likely you're going to have people that want to help out and be involved with the garden. Similarly, if you have extra produce, you might find a food bank to donate some of that to, and in return, maybe they can help by sending volunteers or that kind of thing. Just a minute. Why it's not switching? Oh, now I jumped ahead. Sorry. Okay. Ooh. I guess I froze up for a minute there. Okay. So engaging staff. So all those things I just mentioned, you can also do with staff to get them excited. But just a few other things. I know sometimes schools say they have a hard time getting more teachers involved in the garden. And a lot of times that's just because people aren't comfortable. It might be different territory, new territory for them to take their learning outside of the classroom. Or maybe they just are scared that they might mess something up in the garden. So providing training to other teachers. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that yourself, Seed St. Louis can help with that. So that's one reason we exist, is to provide training, and it's usually free training. So we can do training with your staff or with smaller groups of teachers upon request. You can fill out a form and just reach out to us. And, maybe you just want to engage your math teachers, and, you want to help the math teachers connect their curriculum to the garden. We can come out and work specifically with math teachers and help them find standards that they can take out to the garden, or art teachers, or, maybe it's just like the kindergarten you want to get involved. So we can tailor training so that it meets your needs. Maybe you just want us to come out and do a basic gardening 101. So teachers, that maybe think they don't have a green thumb, can feel a little more comfortable doing basic gardening tasks. So aside from us, there are a lot of great resources out there for that as well. Engaging families. Again, some of the things I already mentioned apply here. Giving things out is always great. Tabling at events is a great way, like open house at the beginning of the year, parent teacher conferences. It's great if you can have someone table to represent the garden. Maybe even a student can do it. But having a table set up that's where in a heavily trafficked area where lots of people will see it, have photos of the garden. Maybe you have extra produce to give out at that time. Anything you can do to just draw people's attention to the garden, and always have a sign up sheet when you're doing that. So if people come over to look at things, to learn more, tell them you can sign up if you want to be part of our garden committee, or if you're interested in possibly volunteering. So it's a great way to engage people. Again, if you have something to give out, that can be nice too. Like if you have extra herbs, you could have students bag up some mint or some herbs to give out at these events as well. Also finding out what families eat and what they like to see growing. So just if you're the garden leader at your school and you really love okra, that doesn't mean everyone else at the school loves okra. So find out, survey what the students and the families are eating. I've done this at a school that had lots of different cultures. So one way we did it was when I tabled at an open house for a parent teacher conference, I had kind of a survey, and I tried to make it easy because there was some language barriers where I just had pictures of different vegetables and things from not just produce that's common here, but from reflecting different cultures. And I let them kind of put a sticker by things they like to eat or they like to see growing, or they could, if they didn't have that communication barrier, we just talked about it. So I kind of like kept a list of what people wanted to see from the growing in the garden, or things that they would actually be interested in harvesting. And I also had students journal about what they like to eat at home, or what their parents or family members like to cook with a lot. So there are actually a lot of crops that are able to grow well in St. Louis that are from other regions of the world. And we have a pretty nice list that a staff person put together that shows kind of just different regions, different continents, and things, produce that originated there that can actually do really well in our growing zone. So you can always reach out, and I'm happy to share that as well. There's some really neat things that can grow well here that you might not think about. Not just our common tomatoes, peppers, squash, that kind of thing. Excuse me. Another thing you can do is host garden parties. So again, making the garden a integral part to the school culture. So when you're having events, if your garden space, or if your garden is at least in a green space that's big enough to host, families, then call it a garden party, but make it also a work party. There's a school in St. Louis that I know does this. They call them garden parties, and people, sometimes they have food trucks, sometimes they usually play music. Families will come and put blankets out, and it's just kind of like an after school, like, meetup. Families meet up, the kids get to hang out after school, but at the same time there might be a list of tasks that could be done in the garden. So you can come, you don't have to help in the garden, but when you have all these people there hanging out around the garden, appreciating the garden, you're more likely to get some people to take some time to come and help, whether it's with weeding, watering, you're building a structure or something like that. So it's nice if you can host those regularly, and again, kind of incorporate it into a garden work day. Okay, so this is just a few kind of tips for engaging more people in your garden project. And then once you kind of have people engaged, some ways to, like us, this kind of goes, coincides with that, but some ways to kind of organize maintenance for the garden. So one of just kind of the easiest ways is a sign-up sheet. So there are lots of different ways you can do this. I'm gonna kind of jump around here a little bit, but one way is have a bulletin board by the office, somewhere where lots of parents and families, people, staff will pass by, highlighting the garden, again, pictures. Maybe you have a map of the garden that could be really helpful, so that if I want to help in the garden, but I don't know what's growing there, there's a map that clearly marks, tomatoes in this bed, what's going on. Maybe there's a list of tasks and when they need to be done here, but just have a simple sign up sheet. So a really common way of doing that is just breaking it down week by week so that it's not just you maintaining the garden every week. If you break down the school year or the summer, especially into just weekly chunks, if you think about the summer, every school is different, but I think it's like about 15 weeks that a lot of schools are closed during the summer. So that's actually a pretty small task if you're just asking 15 families or 15 people that are connected to the school to sign up for a week. So then you don't ever have to step foot in the garden over summer if you have families and people that are helping out, signing up for each week. Because if you sign up for 1 week, that's really only a few days. You actually, that person or family would have to go to the garden to do some basic watering, weeding, and then you can tell them that they get to keep whatever's available to harvest that day. That's if you want to keep the garden going over summer. If not, we'll talk about that too at the end, different approaches with summer maintenance. But you can do this throughout the school year too. And another popular way I've seen it done is through Sign Up Genius, or I'm sure there are a lot of programs like this now. But again, just making, this is free. You can make a free Sign Up Genius page that people can sign up for, and you can I listed tasks here. This is an old one I had. I listed how often things needed to be done. So like turn compost once a week, pulling weeds once a week. I gave some tips on how to pull weeds. It's always good to assume people don't have any background. That way they're more comfortable and you don't have to worry about them pulling something that shouldn't come up. Talked about watering, how often watering needed to be done, and then just had every week listed. So send it home with families, send it out to whoever, your school is okay with possibly coming to help out in the garden if you've made these other connections and partnerships outside of the school, and administration's okay with people coming on to or into the garden area that aren't part of the school community. Then you can send it out to them and they just click sign up, and then you've got that week covered. So that's a really easy way to manage it, and I've seen some schools have a lot of success with that. I talked about flyering. So this is an old flyer that I did, and I was working with Oak Hill, who has a lot of different cultures there. And basically, it's just a half sheet front and back, and I said, highlighting the garden. They were trying to build up their garden committee, and we were able to easily translate it. I don't know how accurate this is, but I was told that it was pretty close using, I think we just use like Google Translate, but it helped to get the message across. And they would have food drives or events where people could come and get boxes of food, and we handed these out there at any kind of school event, and it really helped to get families engaged in the garden. You can also send them home with students in their backpack, or through emails, however you communicate with families. So I mentioned the sign up sheet. Again, this is something that's always good to have on hand at any kind of events. Okay. I think a little out of order, but that's okay. We'll be jumping around. So I'll talk a little more about different approaches to maintenance, specifically with summer in just a minute, but I also want to touch on engaging students in the garden. So students are usually the easiest to engage. They probably are already really excited to get out there. I included, if you see this photo up in the right-hand corner, these were some different results when I did a survey with students on best parts about garden class, and you can see one of them said pulling weeds because I get buff. That's their favorite part of garden class. So getting dirty. So students, you don't usually have to persuade to help out in the garden. They have a lot of fun with it, but just ways to make it a little more manageable or get them excited about it. Definitely involving your students in the decision-making process. They're going to be much more excited to go out to the garden and help out if they played a role in designing or choosing what you're growing in the garden. And there are lots of fun ways you can do that. Having kid-sized things. So most kids don't mind getting their hands dirty, but everyone's different. So if you have some kid-sized gloves, those little small watering cans can be helpful, especially if it's younger students that maybe have a tendency to overwater. So just having little like mini watering cans or even buckets. You can get cheap, smaller plastic buckets, like sets of them, and just give the kids a bucket, stand with the hose, fill them up, and let them one at a time come line up, fill it, and water. Dipping containers can also be useful. So just filling up some kind of big bucket that you might have, or trough with water, and then letting kids take their buckets and going and just dipping them, or even like smaller containers to dip. and then go plant can be an easy way to do that so that the kids aren't fighting over the hose because they all love to water. Um, and hand trowels are great for students rather than using big shovels. Um, Also things like seed tape, where you can buy it or you can just make it, where you're putting seeds on a tape that it's more like a paper. You kind of make a glue with flour, but it will dissolve. And that way, if you have younger students that might not be good at spacing them, the seed tape's already kind of spaced out. Or even just using a little baking flour to kind of spread to help them or show them where to put the seed or kind of to make lines on the soil. Plant moats. So again, with the watering, if you have them just kind of with their hand, if your soil is soft enough, or even using a hand trowel, make a little moat around your seedling. And then when they water, you can kind of tell them fill the moat, and that's all the water. So they don't overwater, and it'll keep the water from spreading. So just by digging kind of a little moat around the seedlings. So creating special tasks. I know a lot of teachers have these in their classroom, or someone might earn the special role of line leader or something like that. So you can even have special tasks for the garden. Sometimes like students that might have some issues, sitting still in the classroom sometimes really shine out in the garden. So by giving those students sometimes special tasks can really help to keep them focused. Stations and rotations are really great for the garden. So if you have the extra help, maybe TA or someone else or a parent that can come help when you're in the garden. So you could set up stations and have the students rotate, like a watering station, weeding, other maybe a digging. There's a bed that you just have for digging and looking for worms, but that can help keep students engaged so they're not getting bored. And that way they all get a chance to do everything. If the students are taking part in actually starting the seeds in the classroom, then that can be really exciting for them to, they'll be really excited to take care of the plant and watch it grow if they're getting to see it from beginning all through the life cycle. Maybe they're journaling it and tracking it. And also just like knowing that students' enthusiasm, well, first of all, your enthusiasm. If you're out in the garden and you're complaining about the heat or the bees or other things, then it's going to rub off on them. So your enthusiasm is infectious, but theirs is too. I've had days that I'm out in the garden with students near the end of the day, and like a parent will come over and walk over and tell me like, my son is so always coming home talking about garden class, and now I want to learn. I don't know anything about gardening and I want to learn. So even just the kids' energy and excitement can spread to the parents, and then the parents might be more excited to get involved with the garden. And then I mentioned adopting. So we'll talk more about the adopt a bed method, but to get kids and also staff engaged, you could do a few things. One is if you have classroom beds, so maybe there are classes that are adopting a bed. So maybe all of the third grade, each third grade class gets a bed, or depending the size of your garden, or maybe teachers can just sign up to get a bed. And then you could even do contests. So whether it's growing contests or even maybe like each third grade class has a bed, then maybe they all have a project, some kind of project-based learning. So maybe they're all tasked with finding a way to keep the rabbits from eating the cabbage. So then each bed becomes, this little learning lab, and it's always fun to get a little competitive too. So turning that into kind of fun, friendly competition between some of the classes, or even doing like square foot gardening, or not even necessarily square foot, but just squaring off with string the beds so that there's enough squares for each student to have one. And if you have a 4 by 8 foot bed, that's usually enough with square foot, for each student to have their own square. And then, they can label their square with their name, and they get to grow whatever, based on what you have available and what's in season. They get to choose what they grow there, and then they're responsible for that square foot. So that can be a lot of fun too. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about summer maintenance. Again, this can also apply to any gardening season, but this is where you tend to see sometimes people get a little discouraged, about like, what do we do in the summertime? Summer is the prime time for gardening. And there's just a lot that you can grow in the summer, but it's also totally okay to not grow in your school garden in the summer. So Really, it's based on what your goal is. So if your goal for the garden is to provide produce to the community, to families, then you'll probably want to grow over summer because that's when you'll get a lot of those things like, you know, well, tomatoes, pepper, I mean, just a lot of most everything except for greens and like root veggies grow in the summertime. So if that's your goal, you'll probably want to find a way to keep your garden going over summer. Um, and maybe you do summer programming and you want to keep it going for that. Then you probably want to find ways to keep it growing. But if really your main goal with the garden is to use it during classes when students are in session in the fall and in the spring, and keep it tidy so that your district, your grounds crew, landscaping, scape, whoever you contract landscaping with, they're not getting upset over this garden that's kind of out of control over summer, then maybe your best bet is to put it to sleep. So we'll talk about ways you can kind of do both of those. A lot of the things I've already mentioned work great for the summertime. Engaging lots of people, families, that's especially helpful in the summertime when, you might not want to be spending your summers at the school. And there won't be a lot of staff around. So all those methods, getting like neighbors or other people from the greater school community involved, can then sign up for the summer. But there are also other ways you can do that. So I'll come back to that. One way I kind of already touched on is the adopt a bed. So you could essentially turn your school garden into a community garden over summer. Maybe that doesn't mean it's all like neighbors using the garden, but are there people who live nearby, especially if your school is like a neighborhood school, if the students are coming from the neighborhood, there might be families who want to adopt a bed over the summer. So maybe that family is taking care of that one bed all summer. It becomes kind of their bed to maintain. So there's still produce going back out into the community. Things are being, kept tidy and managed. Or like I said, maybe there's even like a local small like business or something nearby, or a nonprofit that you can see if they want to kind of adopt a bed over summer. You could also, if people are signing up, I think I already mentioned that if they're signing up, you could tell them that they get to harvest whatever is available. But I will say, if you're going to do this, it's really helpful to have a few things. So a map of the garden, so that it's clearly labeled or numbered which bed is which, and also having everything that that person or family would need. And I'll touch on that in a little bit. But there's an easy way you can put together a little like summer maintenance kit. And I'll get back to that in just a minute. So this is also just a helpful task list, whether you're doing the sign up or however you're managing. If you're keeping your garden growing, it's nice to really, again, assume people don't know anything. So that way they just have all the information they need. So this could be something you send out to people who adopt a bed or who sign up to help, just to very clearly line out all the tasks that need to be done that month and how often. Any information you can give is helpful. So maybe you can also form a partnership with a nearby group. So there's a school that I did some garden classes at, who across the street, there's a church. It's also a school. But in the summertime, that church does summer programming with youth. So the school was not hosting summer school. So the school was not going to be in session. So they talked to the church and they said, you can, if you want, you can use our nice big garden for your summer programming. You can bring your students over if you're just willing to help water some of these other beds that we want to keep going over summer. So that could be a great way. Or if there's like another school nearby that can easily like get there, again, leveraging the assets that exist in your community. There's lots, or there's summer programs, or even like after school programs. You could do that during the school year as well. If there's a group in the area that does like some kind of after school program, you could partner with them and maybe they come and help water in return for being able to take their youth or after school program to your garden to learn and do activities. Skip. It did. Okay. Okay, a few more tips. So for summer garden tips and tricks, always start small. You might have a garden with 15 beds, but that doesn't mean you have to grow in all of them over summer. maybe just grow in 2 or 3 of them. It's much more manageable. And you can still have some things growing, and the other beds you can put to sleep, which I'll touch on that in a little bit. I'm always thinking about how can you work smarter rather than harder. I know irrigation isn't something that's that easy for anyone to just obtain and have in their garden, but could you use a timer maybe with a sprinkler, soaker hoses, things that can make your work a little easier. Also, mulching can be really helpful as a sustainable agricultural practice. It can help suppress weed growth, help to maintain moisture so it's not drying out as often. And the school garden maintenance kit I mentioned. So there was a teacher that actually told me about this years ago, and I thought it was a brilliant, simple idea. But just putting together a little maintenance kit. So you could just use a bucket and putting all the essentials so that any volunteer, any parent, any teacher, anyone that's coming to help with the garden after school hours, or when they can't maybe talk to you about it, they have everything they need. So you don't need a whole lot to maintain a garden. Just a simple hand trowel. This one I put together, I laminated basic instructions, so weeding instructions, watering instructions, laminated it so it wouldn't fall apart. If it got wet, put some gloves in there, put a magnifying glass. That way, if someone comes and they bring, a child, the child has something to do while they are helping to take care of the garden. The child can explore, look for bugs. You could even get really fancy and laminate some pictures of common weeds that grow in your beds there. That way, if I have no background in gardening, but I want to help out and I see the stuff growing all over and I don't know what it is, if it's a herb or if it's a weed, then you have a simple little guide there to help them identify stuff, because you'll start to know, you probably know your garden well and what tends to take over. Maybe some food harvesting bags, some pruners, and then the big thing is the access to the hose. So a lot of schools have that little square key to turn the hose on. So if you already have permission to allow people to come and help with this, then it can be helpful if you stick the key in there and you can put this somewhere hopefully safe where others won't. People that don't need to find a key will not find it. But I know schools that use this and find it very helpful. A few other tips for summer. Thinking about low maintenance crops. This is just this isn't an exhaustive list, but some things that can be good for summer. Sweet potatoes are great. If you're planting slips, they do require a lot of water at first, just when they're little slips. But once they get established, you don't need a lot of attention at all. Once the vines really start growing, unless it's a really, really dry summer, usually, they can do pretty good off the rain. So they don't need a ton of watering. And they're great because they will really suppress a lot of the weeds because the vines will just take over the bed. So shade out a lot of other weeds popping up. And you can actually eat the greens from sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are a lot of fun to harvest. You plant them at the end of a school year, they're ready to harvest at the beginning of another school year. So sweet potatoes are a great crop for schools. And again, low maintenance over summer. Garlic, things that overwinter. So garlic, onions, winter squash, things that you plant in the fall and then just mulch and kind of leave be. And then, they'll start growing in the spring. They can be a little bit easier. Winter squash is a great one because it stores well. So thinking about things that store well, because if you do want the students to eat a lot of this and there aren't families or people coming to harvest it, you don't want it all going to waste. So things that can be dehydrated, pickled, or just stored are always great summer options. So winter squash, especially tromboncino squash, is a really great one. Tromboncino squash, if you don't know about it, is one of our favorites because you can pick it when it's younger, when it's still a green color and it's like a summer squash. You can eat it like a zucchini, you can eat the skin, or you can let it grow till it's bigger and it starts to become kind of a pale yellow, and then the skin hardens and it's basically a winter squash. So then you can eat it without the skin. It's really good for spiralizing too. It grows long and all the seeds are at the end of it. So it's one of our favorite squashes and it's a little more resistant to pests. But I digress. So things like that that store well on the counter are great. Herbs, they can be pretty easy, low maintenance, easy to harvest. And then perennials are always great. Things that you don't have to replant each year. That's going to make your life a little easier. Yeah, the other things, cucumbers tend to grow well, bush beans, again, it's just a small list. I mentioned things that store well. So if you want this to be stuff that you can give back to families or students can enjoy once they come back to school, then think about growing things that you can pickle or freeze, anything you can chop up and freeze so that you can use it when students are back. Because you can store in like herbs, you can put in oil and freeze, and little like ice cube trays work well for that. Things that you can dry out, beans, fruits you can dehydrate. Okay, so now moving on to the other approach, which is putting a garden to sleep. So again, there is nothing wrong. A sustainable garden still can be a garden that is not used over summer or anytime, even during the school year. If it's a year that you're just really busy and maybe you don't have the capacity that you had last year, it's okay to put the garden to sleep as long as you are being intentional about it. Because one of the worst things you can do is just ignore a garden. That is when sometimes, I mean, if you just ignore a garden over summer, you will come back and often find small trees growing in those beds. And, that's when a lot of times the school district might not be happy with the garden. So once it becomes messy, that's not a good thing. So it's very simple to keep that from happening. So there are a few different things you can do if you're not necessarily growing to harvest in the garden. But one of the easiest is basically just covering the bed. So the weed fabric is actually something we carry in our store, but you can you can use lots of things, but you just want to make sure it's something that's going to completely shade out any sunlight. The weed fabric also keeps water out. So if there are weeds in there, it's going to suppress any new growth. But we do recommend first weeding the bed really well before you do that. So if you have stuff growing in there, you want to remove it all. So weeding it can be helpful if you put down some cardboard first, but you don't have to do that. Just to, give it a little extra coverage, blocking the sun and smothering out any weeds, and then rolling the weed fabric over it and just securing it with like sod staples. But as you can see, other schools have also just kind of made use with what they had. So the school just found the students collected rocks and they put cardboard on it. I'm sure the cardboard started to kind of deteriorate over time, but it still did the job pretty well. They didn't come back to a bed full of weeds growing in August. So anything you can do, just really want to try to cover all of that soil, because especially if your bed tends to get like grass growing in it or weeds, with rhizomes, if there's just a little patch showing, then that can still spread. So you want to really try to cover every inch of that bed. Another thing you can do is plant cover crops. So if you're not familiar with cover crops, I'm not going to go too in depth with them, but it's basically something that you grow in your bed, but not with the intention of harvesting. Sometimes it might be something like winter wheat can be a cover crop. So it's wheat, but you're not necessarily growing it for it to get tall and to harvest and use as wheat. You're growing it with the intention of keeping the bed. So there's a few benefits for this. So one thing it does by growing all this stuff is keeping other weeds from coming up in the bed. It's also the things that you would use as cover crops they provide a lot of nutrients for the soil. And they also don't have really deep, thick root system. So basically what you do, depending on the type of cover crop, you sow it in the soil, it grows for a certain amount of time. And when that time is up, again, it varies based on the cover crop, you basically just work it back in, you fill it and work it back into the soil. And then as it dies, or it should already be dead, but as it decomposes, it's putting nutrients back into the soil. So it's a good way to add nutrients to your soil and keep your other weeds and things from coming up and growing in your soil. Also can help with like erosion, lots of different things that benefits to cover crops. So again, it kind of depends on the type of, the time of year as far as what type of cover crop. But for summer, some that we suggest are buckwheat, because it can be tilled in 30 to 60 days. That's really what matters there, is how much time it needs to grow, until you can till it back into the soil. And then one new one that we just started carrying, I think last year, the year before, is cowpeas, which isn't typically a cover. I don't think a lot of people think of it as a cover crop, but cowpeas do kind of spread and act as a cover crop. So because they have that short growth period, it's something that we started carrying as a cover crop. So you should be able to find that on our online store if you're interested in trying it. But basically, you're sowing it all over the entire bed. So you want it to cover the bed when you're growing it. Okay. I think that about covers it. So if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A. If you're interested in any of the documents or any of the resources I mentioned, feel free to email me, that cultural crop list I'm happy to share out. This will also be a recording, so it should be up on our YouTube tomorrow, Friday, at least by Monday. So you can look for the recording of this on Monday. Thank you all for joining. And I don't see any